Nury Turkel, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today. Thank you for joining us for IOHR TV.
Thank you very much for your interest.
Now, you're a Uyghur and you're incredibly proud of the fact that you are, but from day one, you have been discriminated against because of your racial background. Tell me the story of how you were born in a prison cell.
I was born in a prison cell in Kashgar during the Cultural Revolution. In that period, a lot of Uyghur intellectuals, artists, thought leaders were thrown to jail. In the late 70s, things started getting back to normal. My parents were allowed to return to work, and others also being released. Because of this horrific life experience that I had, I grew up hearing about the brutality that my mother in particular was forced to experience at a very young age. She was barely 20 when all this happened. And it's inconceivable and it's hard to believe that history is repeating itself. I can say with certainty that the repression that I have been directly, indirectly experiencing has been happening as long as my lifetime.
Why are the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang area, why are they being persecuted, and why are they being herded and put into these concentration camps?
Historically, there has been a mentality in the Chinese leadership that the Uyghurs are others. Kind of cute, foreign-looking people with colorful clothes, good food, beautiful geographical significant, a beautiful homeland with mountains, lakes, and rivers. But that kind of positive interest become a self-made enemy in the Uyghurs, particularly since 9/11. The Chinese government has been telling the world since 9/11 that they are also combating extremism or terrorism. And the Western governments, in a way, responsible for the Chinese to further that scapegoat terrorism claim. This mentality and this approach helped Xi Jinping to implement new policy around the time that they launched, his government launched the Belt and Road Initiative, or China Dream Project. When you look at the Uyghurs' homeland on the map, it sits in a strategically important region in a Eurasia landmass. It has over 1,000 kilometers international border. It is a gateway to Eurasian, even African market. It is geopolitically very important for China's counter-influence effort against the United States, other Western powers, or even for Russia. That's one reason, geopolitical reason, one reason. And the other is a political reason. Since Xi Jinping took office in 2012, China has turned itself into a one-man country. This is why we've been seeing China becoming increasingly authoritarian and tyrannical, not suppressing not only the others, ethnic minorities, but also their own citizens. The social credit system, digital surveillance, and monitoring the activities, daily lives, private lives of their citizens has displayed the signs of insecurity in Xi Jinping's leadership. So they wanted to quarantine a potential threat that would undermine Xi Jinping's leadership and Communist Party's survival. And finally, this has a lot to do with racism. This should shock the conscience when any government, any authority, any political leader criminalize an ethnic group based on ethnicity, religious practices. For the Chinese government, Uyghur Islam is a mental illness. Uyghurs' cultural appreciation was sense of for the Chinese government, Uyghurs' sense of appreciating their cultural values is a cancerous tumor. Their way of leading a spiritual life, practicing their religion, as a sign of mental illness, coupled with the perception by the Chinese governments that these are the hallmarks of disloyalty to the central government.
Do we have any idea what happens in these, the Chinese government call them re-education camps, you call them giant prisons, they're called concentration camps. What actually happens there?
So you need to look at how and how do they end up being in the camps and what kind of people do they have in the camps. The way that you end up in the camps is as harmless as talking to someone in a foreign country. I know it for a fact. Several of my friends or social contacts or acquaintances been telling their stories of their loved ones, family members, end up being in the concentration camps simply because of them having foreign contact. Guilt by association. And the other type is social elites, business leaders, even athletes, pop stars, movie stars, anyone who has influence in society or rallying force have been taken away. So when you see this kind of behaviors and thought process in the Chinese government's leadership and urgently putting in place some measures to stamp out the Uyghur national identity, whatever they call it, makes no sense. I have to say this, anyone believes in Chinese government's narrative should have head examination. Them showing the Potemkin village to some friendly, sympathetic governments does not change the narrative, even though that changes the structure of the sentence, the wording. The reality, these are real concentration camps. Scholars, journalists, and very senior government officials, particularly in the United States, have used the terms like internment camps, concentration camps, and words like world has not seen anything like it since 1930s. These are the statements made by very serious, senior government officials in the United States. That includes Assistant Secretary of State Randy Shriver, a senior diplomat Michael Kozak, even Vice President Mike Pence. I know when I say that the other leaders who believe in democracy, who believe in human values, should feel a little uncomfortable, because they should also say or make the similar statements in solidarity with the Uyghurs and in defense of civil liberties. Earlier
I spoke to Bill Browder and he was talking about what the international community should be doing to help the Uyghurs, and he said it's a no-brainer. He said we hit them where it hurts and we just don't do business with them. Why isn't this happening?
For a couple of reasons. The number one reason, I think the Chinese government made a calculus initially that the world is in disarray. We live in a leaderless world. There's no one single leader today in free societies could take the leadership. We have government officials, that's a fundamentally different thing. We need to have a leader or leaders collectively come together, speak in one voice with very specific objectives and mindset to rectify a situation. We have not seen it. And also, the Chinese government also made a calculus that the business communities will not raise a finger. So, and also thirdly, the Chinese government also taking advantage of this Islamophobia in the West. Let's face it, we have problem with people having negative views about certain religious minorities. Perhaps you should follow this model. It's working. So what do? We should go after the businesses. I think there's some momentum in the United States Congress that already showing some result. Google stopped supporting Huawei. And there's a conversation actively taking place in the United States that they will ban some technology companies. The Hikvision have been circulated a lot in the news. That makes world's 1/3 of world's security cameras and believed to be partly owned by the Chinese government. So answer is very simple. Political leaders need to grow a backbone. And business community need to re-examine their relationship with this police state.
Unfortunately, racial targeting isn't confined to China. some other countries are actually adopting the Chinese method. What can you tell me about this?
It's a disgraceful method. We live in a free societies, UK, United States. We give up some of our civil liberties for security. Particularly, I used to be an aviation lawyer. We give up some of our civil liberties for the protection of aviation industry, aviation safety. Fine, we adapt. But none of us end up going to the jail after our iris scans being scanned, after having a wrong contact in our phones, after having a wrong applications in our phones. None of these are happening. And we have things called courts to go to. There's a fundamental difference. What we're talking about is a collective punishment using technology to make people's life miserable. Just imagine for 1 second. How would you feel if somebody just grabbed your phone and forced you to go through a data scan? What kind of information will end up in the other end of the technology? What kind of information that you will be forced to give up? Pictures, intimate messages, emails, private information, bank accounts. This is the reality for the Uyghur people. And the Chinese government is promoting this. Today, we have about 18 countries, as reported in the New York Times. That includes Germany.
Do you think that the majority of the Chinese people are even aware of the situation with the Uyghurs because of the media crackdown, because of cyber security? Do you think that they're fully up to speed?
I don't think that the Chinese government, I don't think that the Chinese people, ordinary citizens, are aware of this, unless you're part of the establishment, unless you're part of this internal debate and deliberation and discussions. I think the Chinese citizens need to be notified and put on notice. The social credit system is a disastrous idea. It's state surveillance, pervasive state surveillance establishment in the process of being expanded to other regions is a disastrous idea. Protecting national interest, social security is another thing. You know, we all need to have certain level of law enforcement to protect our safety. But this kind of collective punishment with a very specific, intrusive objective in mind, it should be condemned and should be stopped.
Nury Turkel, we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.